welcome everyone to this week's Friday Poets Day 4:30 end of the week webinar. This week we'll talk about commercial building radiation. We wrote a blog about it last week, if anyone read that, saw that. So we'll talk a little bit more about that, and if anyone comes along with any questions, we'll answer them. That'd be great. And I know everyone's got 5G questions, so I'm always willing to have a look at them. And if anyone wants to ask a question where they would like a property reading with Google Earth, I'd be happy to do that at the end of this webinar, part of the webinar. The reason we decided to talk about commercial building radiation is in the light of, well, us Victorians, we only got let out of jail last week, which meant that a lot of people are returning back to the workplace. And over the last 100 days or whatever from the Melbourne lockdown, even going back to March, a lot of people have commented to me that they feel more comfortable working from home. The energy feels a lot better working from home. They get more done working from home. They're not harassed by other people who maybe they didn't like to work with so much when they're working at home. And that is because energetics, or the radiation aspects of our houses, generally is better than our workplaces. I'm not saying that as a percentage, I'd just say generally. There are a lot of houses which have energetics or radiation issues which are as bad as workplaces due to maybe deaths on properties or fissures or past historical things going on. But generally our home environments are a lot better than our work environment. So if we look at why our work environments are so radiation filled and toxic, there's a number of different reasons for that. The big component of what I call commercial building radiation, I've called it that and I've named it that myself, and it's not a building biology term. You probably won't find it out there, and I bet you there's a lot of people who are going, oh, what a silly term to use, or why doesn't he pinpoint it as one major thing? But no, what goes on in any commercial, industrial workplace is a lot different to what goes on in our home spaces. So, for example, the biggest problem with our workplaces is the people we work with. And it's not a slur or anything. We don't always get along with the people we work with. And not everyone we work amongst is, I call, emotionally sane. And that is, and I'll give you a good example. You might have a large office environment, and you might have people who of mixed races. And of those mixed races, there's going to be a few who are going to be racist. And those who might be racist, and I'm not picking on or anything like that, it's just a really good example. Those people who tend to have that sort of mindset really aren't all that really well balanced. If you really think of it, it's not a nice thing to be like, and may tend to be overly zealous in their belief systems and what they think of and how they think about their work colleagues, or even who they're working for. And so if you've got people in the workplace who can maintain their emotional equanimity, their emotional pain body energy, which is their diseased emotional pain body energy, becomes overwhelming, and they may start lashing out at people or thinking intensely negatively about other people within the workplace or the management or whatever. And then all of a sudden, their strong emotional pain body charge becomes what they call a bioplasmic radiation charge, which is human generated. And that charge fills the workspace. So if you've got, say, an office complex of, say, or one, let's say complex, so one employer, let's say of about 100 people of different levels of management, where not everyone's getting along, or there's maybe a severe defect with management on how they treat the people below them, then you've got all this negative emotional stuff flying backwards and forwards around the place, because that group there don't like that group there, and that person there despises that group there, and that person there despises that person management. We see it all the time. People think it's just harmless thoughts, but after a while, that thickens and becomes a heavier and heavier charge in the workplace, and then all of a sudden, the entire workplace building environment is as bad as 5G in streetlights. I'm always coming back to the 5G in streetlights because it's just such a hell of a rip of a benchmark of the epitome of severe radiation. And when I say that is when you create a bioplasmic charge in the space, then you create a geoelectric field in the ground, which creates the radiation coming up out of the ground, just like 5G does, which then in turn, because a building is a resonant cavity, it fully fills the building with charge. So there's one reason. We tend to get less of that at home. Like not every home environment is fully functional. We like to hope and think that home environments are full of love and affection and care for each other, which is the opposite to what would go in a workplace. But that doesn't always happen in the home environment either. But let's see more of that. Another aspect of what could be causing what I call the commercial building radiation is fluorescent lighting. And it's amazing how many industrial buildings, especially commercial buildings, are still using fluorescent lighting. We know what that looks like. It's a long tube fluorescent lights. And I've mentioned this before in the past, at certain supermarkets in Australia, and I'm not going to name any, I don't want anyone chasing me down, but there's one particular supermarket that I know of that every time you go in there, they've got very low slung fluorescent lighting. And with the fluorescent lighting, and I've been saying this for a long, long time, for many, many years, that wherever fluorescent lighting sheds light, it sheds radiation. So back in 2007, 2008, 2009, when I know the Victorian government was handing out compact fluorescent light globes to householders to replace their so-called inefficient incandescent light globes, which were harmless, little did the powers that be know that they were jeopardizing everyone's health by handing these compact fluorescent light globes out, because you put one compact fluorescent light globe in the ceiling of the average bedroom, and if it didn't have other radiation aspects attached to it, as soon as you turn that light on, you had the whole bedroom resonant cavity full of charge from the fluorescent light globe, even though it's a compact fluorescent. And so in as I said, in commercial, industrial, whatever, fluorescent lighting is being used forever and a day, and it's still being used quite a lot. There has been a move over the last probably 4 to 5 years towards LEDs. And I really hate it when you get people coming out of the woodwork who might have a doctrine behind them, claiming that they're an expert in radiation from Europe, shooting down LEDs for some weird reason that, okay, they're not a natural light, and therefore it's not healthy for our eyes. But God, every form of lighting we have is unnatural. And when the sun is spitting big, strong solar winds at us, like it's about to do this weekend, even though you might call that natural light, the energy, the biophoton coming from the sun because of the solar winds makes it an unnatural light, because it's like one big fluorescent light globe causing a geoelectric effect on the Earth's crust worldwide, not just in the one building. So don't shoot the LED down when the elephant in the China store is really the fluorescents that are still being used en masse in industry and commercial everywhere. Another form of radiation, which again comes back to emotional pain body charge radiation, that does affect commercial buildings and businesses and everything, is negative psychic impression coming from elsewhere. And it can be from a number of different scenarios. First one might be from a competitor. I remember vividly many years ago doing a reading over the phone for a woman who was a bit worried about her husband's workplace. And he worked in a steel yard, as in a steel company, one of the largest steel companies in Australia that supplied steel reinforced concrete and steel components into the construction industry. And she was worried about the radiation coming from the welding equipment and the Wi-Fi and things like that there. And when I looked at the building with Google Earth, it naturally sort of jumped out and hits me in the head and goes, wow, this building's got a lot of radiation issues, a lot of charge, a lot of stuff coming from it. And when I looked and surveyed around the building, not just the building itself, but around it, I noticed that there was an energy line, so to speak, coming in from one direction. And that energy line was a line of charge. So it was a negative psychic impression attack, so to speak. And it does manifest like an Earth magnetic grid line. We see it with Google Earth all the time. And it was actually coming from its competitor, who was only 5 kilometres down the road. And the funny thing was, when I looked at this woman's husband's workplace as competitor, the husband's workplace, it was sending a reciprocal charge to the competitor that was sending a charge to it. And just talking from experience, like in a previous life, I did a hell of a lot of work throughout the commercial concrete construction industry and industrial and civil concrete construction industry. That's why I got a lot of my building biology background knowledge, which some building biologists might say how, but when you work amongst structures all the time, there's a lot you do learn. And I also knew that the steel reinforcement companies way back then, their margins were super slim because they were slogging it out against each other in the marketplace, one against the other on every site virtually across Australia. And they had a hatred for each other that was just deplorable. Like, okay, we don't expect the competitors to get along, but because it was construction industry, it was all men, it was full of emotional pain body charge. And you could, as I said from previous experience, when I saw what was going on between one and the other, it was almost laughable. I had to explain to this woman that, no, don't worry about the Wi-Fi and don't worry about the welding equipment. It's coming from the competitor. And it was having a massive effect on her husband's heart. And I think he was in his 50s and being in a trade labouring type of environment in that job for about 20 or 30 years. So 20 or 30 years of exposure to that type of energy really, really wore him down. People are always saying to me, oh, you know, I'm falling apart at work. I don't like the energy. I don't like the people. I don't like the energy. It must be the Wi-Fi. It must be the technology hub that's there. And to tell the truth, the least amount of radiation in a commercial industrial building is actually going to come from the Wi-Fi. Have been saying this for many, many years. Your wireless router is only active when someone's on the internet. Okay, in a workplace, every man and his dog's emailing or streaming or Zooming or you know, Googling something all day long. So there's a lot of data being used. The routers are always in use. For sure, if you've got a lot of computers in an office environment working wirelessly with one router, even though the router's radiation field which is a charge field, which is what really causes radiation stress to the body, may only extend out 1.5 meters or 2 around the router. And if you've been into school environments, also same thing, or large office environments, their modems or their routers don't sit on a desk next to the computer like we have at home. They're up on a wall somewhere. They're a much more powerful unit, but they're away from everyone. So the direct exposure from the router in the office environment isn't going to be like you're going to have at home. But you will have, you know, from the one router and all this equipment around the place, the communication energy beams going to and from them. And then the workstation, the laptop or the computer, or it's usually laptop these days, because it's being operated wirelessly, is going to create a greater charged field around it. And okay, if you're touching a computer, if you're not using a harmonizer, then because you're touching a device, you're under a lot more radiation stress than you are spatial to the radiation from a device. So the assumption that the Wi-Fi in a building is going to be the thing that's wiping everyone out by 2 o'clock in the afternoon is wrong, is because the Wi-Fi fields aren't as great as the bioplasmic fields, which can cause in a build can be created in a building. Some buildings, some office complexes operate very large areas, and I say this for schools too, and schools also come under commercial building radiation. We've written blogs and we've spoken about schools in their particular idiosyncrasies regarding emotional pain body states, the children and maybe the teachers and the parents and that whole, to and fro type of thing. But schools are commercial operations. They're full of little workers, which are children, which are throwing their emotional pain body charge and psychic attack charge everywhere, especially after they've eaten lunch, which if the lunch isn't a healthy lunch, it's going to cause digestive system stress, hormone stress, neurotransmitter stress. And so, that probably creates the lunchtime bully in the school place, and probably creates the afternoon bully in the workplace too. Eat the wrong thing for lunch and you're going to pay for it. You're going to weaken your body. And so then when your body is weakened, your organs are weakened, your meridian energy is weakened, you go back into that unhealthy workplace environment for the afternoon, and you're not going to survive it as well as you will, as you would have been fresh in the morning. That is, if you haven't filled yourself with egg and bacon, cheese muffins in the morning and 4 or 5 cups of coffee. Okay, so getting back to what I was talking about, some workplaces are very large tracts of land, very large buildings, and so then your bioplasmic radiation that you will encounter in the workplace will be from one or many death imprints which were on the land before the building was built. And take for example, in any inner city of older cities around Australia, where there may have been residential, maybe slum areas, which would have had its own negative psychic impression, emotional pain body radiation issues from, say, the 20s, 30s, 40s, so whatever. Then they come along and decided, well, let's rezone this as industrial or commercial, trendy commercial. Let's put up a nice office building here in, let's say, call it Richmond or Fitzroy or suburbs like that in Victoria or Melbourne. And there's been a lot of deaths on the land from the history. You put a building up, and instantly that building, from the beginning of the construction of the building, is the land has bioplasmic radiation, geoelectric radiation coming out of the ground from all the deaths that have occurred on the land beforehand. Electrical radiation being a big problem or a big cause of radiation in commercial buildings, not so, because let's look at a bit of history around electrical radiation. If you're living in a house building that was built prior to the 1960s, the power points, the way they were wired, were a lot different to how they were, say, from 70s, 80s onwards. And I'm not an electrician. I've been, one, told this by electricians, to observe this in my consultancy work. When you go into some of these very, very old houses that have got extremely old power points, and they might only have one in every room, each one of those electrical power points, because of the system and the age and everything, the power point is creating a radiation field that extends out 1.5 meters around it. And that's unusual for a power point. Power points radiation should only extend out about 6 inches around it. I don't measure electrical radiation with a Gauss meter, which is what traditionally measures it, because a Gauss meter does not measure the true size of the radiation field around some of these very old power points. But newer power points don't do that. So, newer commercial or industrial buildings might have more power points, more electrical circuits in them, but they're not the radiation danger, the high frequency radiation, as some people like to call it, isn't the elephant in the China store. So it's not really that. Mold is another big issue, which can also contribute to commercial building radiation. I especially find this in, how would you put it? Organic greengrocer stores, and I'm not picking on them because we go to them all the time, but this is a really interesting observation. As you know, a lot of our citrus fruit, certain times of the year, goes moldy very, very quickly. You just need a bit of moisture in the air. And the oranges you brought home and put in the bowl yesterday, by the next afternoon or the day after, you pick it up and you turn it around, and it's full of very, very dangerous toxic mold. You just have to shake it and it's blown through the air. And I find some of those older organic fruit and veggie shops, they're a little bit dark and dingy in the corners. There's not enough light, so they're not watching and they can't see what's actually growing. And those buildings have so much mold in them that I've seen so many really sensitive people, especially women, and they're the ones who tend to be more sensitive to mold, whether it be the exposure to mold or it's the resonance from mold. And I've always been talking about the resonance from mold. That's why we have the stellodome, to neutralize the resonance from mold, because if you're chemically sensitive to it, then you're going to be energetically sensitive to that. And I've proved that with a lot of people over the last few years. And I'm not saying, as I said, I'm not trying to pick on the small little organic grocery greengrocer. I just see that as a common issue. I've also seen your larger supermarkets, which tend to have more staff around to be more vigilant in making sure that everything's turned over a lot quicker, and maybe they have a higher turnover of fruit and vegetables. But I do see it in those larger supermarkets too. Air conditioning units and more airborne issues from air conditioned ducting in large industrial and commercial complexes is another big issue. We all know what Legionnaires is. It's something that grows in air conditioning systems, and I've known people over the years who've come up with some really ingenious ways of treating air conditioning, and it's also even large hot water services in larger buildings using frequencies and being extremely successful. But the more traditional ways of keeping air conditioning and ductwork cleaning has in the past not been all that great. We all see it every few years. There's a Legionella outbreak here and there's a Legionella outbreak there, which is a worst case scenario. But big air conditioning units and big commercial buildings, if they're not managed and maintained properly, they are going to cause some issues. I'll just see if there's any questions and answers. No, we're having a quiet afternoon. I think this week's a really interesting week with the American election just gone, and we're all just coming out of pandemic. I'll call it something else, but anyway, it's thrown a lot of people. I can see a lot of people are quite disorientated in their eyes, eyes aren't on the ball. They're watching big events elsewhere, or maybe everyone's just out in Victoria out shopping today because they haven't had a chance to over the last 100 days. Quite funny. Okay, mobile phones and smaller technology in commercial buildings being a big contributor to commercial building radiation. No, not really. Don't think so. We all know phones are a danger, but they aren't going to fill the whole workplace full of radiation. Although you do, especially with 5G being installed on 4G, and then there are more and more 4G towers going up. And as I've said, the 4G, 5G towers aren't as dangerous as the 5G microcell antennas in the streetlights, which we have in some suburbs around Australia. But with the increase in the amount of towers going up, I have noticed an increase in the amount of towers in industrial areas, because those commercial industrial people are big data users, and I've seen it already where a few businesses have actually benefited from switching from 4G to 5G for the commercial operation, because the tower's gone up in their industrial complex and they're being able to get the 5G. It's not the 5G wave that's doing it. It's the close proximity of the commercial buildings being to the mobile phone towers. And in industrial areas, they don't care. They'll put one in wherever they find a gap, in a car park at the front of an industrial building where they might have a wide nature strip, or they could take up a couple of car parks just to put this tower in, or they're putting the towers on top of the roofs of these commercial industrial buildings. And as bad as they are, put a mobile phone tower on top of it, you just increase the geoelectric radiation charges coming out of the ground. And it is interesting when I look at commercial building areas, as I'm searching with Google Earth, and when you get to a commercial building or industrial building area, and with Google Earth it stands out as bright as day, because the industrial stuff is just grey, 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 with all the tin roofs. Everything's grey. The walls are grey. Everything's grey. And as I run my cursor over those industrial areas, there is a huge difference in the overall energy over the industrial areas compared to the residential areas. If you didn't know any better, if you were looking at the industrial areas, you would think that they have 5G streetlights operating in those areas, but no, none of them do. None of them actually do. It's all in residential areas, wherever it is operating. But the commercial building radiation, in a sense, is as bad as having 5G in your streetlights everywhere. And I've made that statement to lots of people over the years, especially since 5G's come in, because I'm always trying to tell people, don't get in too much fear about 5G. It's not something new that's come along that we haven't had before. We've been living in or working in those sorts of environments for a long, long time without even being aware of it. Or if we were sensitive, we would have been extremely aware of it. And what some of the tragedies about the radiation issues in commercial buildings is that those people whose health isn't 100% and they're very sensitive to radiation, they're usually the ones that have the viruses. And I keep on talking about Epstein-Barr virus being behind the chronic fatigue syndrome, chronic fatigue syndrome. It's too late on the Friday afternoon. The fibromyalgia symptoms, the foggy head syndromes, the constipation syndrome, the bad stomach processing of all those types of things, all tend to be byproducts of the Epstein-Barr, and from that comes the electro-hypersensitivity or sensitivity to radiation. They're the ones who are actually forced out of the workplace. And with the 100 days we just went through, I did talk to a lot of people who were quite electro-hypersensitive, and yes, they were the ones who were having a much better, easier time working from home. Another question came up over the last few weeks was, and this was from a wholesale customer, was, okay, all these people have been working from home. They're still not out of the firing line from the negative psychic impression from the competitors or the other workers in the workplace. And is that impacting the poor guy or girl who's working from home? Is he protected from the negative psychic impression? And the answer is no. And I've noticed with a little bit of survey work and looking around, bit of detective work, so to speak, with Google Earth, I have noticed that some people working from home, after about a week, their home energetics, because of the negative psychic impression, which is increasing the bioplasmic radiation, either coming from outside in or born within. So they're working from home and they're having the negative thoughts about the boss or the other worker or the competitor or the stress, that they're creating the same commercial building environment in the home environment. Hence, still, the need to be having harmonizers in the workplace, whether it be home and work, because the GeoCleans and the Stelladone, they're probably some of the only products in the world that actually do remove and neutralize, completely harmonize the charge caused by emotional pain body radiation and bioplasmic radiation and geoelectric radiation, depending on what the cause of it is. Another one to mention before we finish, in regarding to a home dwelling, a building that was traditionally built as a house, a home, that over the years has all of a sudden lost its function as a family home and then has become a workplace. such as, like, for example, a lot of health practitioners out there, whether it be doctors, dentists, psychologists, chiropractors, naturopaths, bioresonance practitioners, kinesiologists, whatever, tend to like to buy up little houses here and there and move their practices into their houses, and the houses become the workplace. And they too instantly become commercial building radiation environments, especially if they're working in the more alternate health industries. They tend to come under a huge amount of psychic attack from people who are skeptical about or have a negative point of view about these natural health practitioners, about what they do and how they do things, and maybe a bit of jealousy about their success. And that over probably, well, no, 20 or 30 house readings over the last few years where people have been working in alternate health practitioner practices in homes, where we've actually been able to track the psychic attack back to the actual attacker, and the attacker being a health practitioner which would always have a dim or a negative view of the alternate health practitioner. Maybe this is a little bit of a heads up to all those people working in the alternate health industry, understanding that how much attack that they really are from the government and from all their minions working around and for them in their cause to wipe out natural medicine. I'm not trying that to say that to be controversial, but that's actually a real fact these days. And if you want me to create a webinar about all the things that are going on behind the scenes with the TG beep and the ABB beep and CHBOCO, I won't say the final words. Some interesting major groups out there and who they're attacking, what they're attacking, and poor old natural medicine is copying it and copying it energetically from the psychic attack. It's really food for thought and something that needs to be considered. And maybe those who are doing the attacking need to have a bit of introspection and look closely at their own values and their belief systems and re-examine them, because they are actually causing physical health to physical damage to health to a lot of people just from their crappy little minds, so to speak. That's my little rant about how negatively natural health is being slammed to pieces at the moment, and it's going on behind the smoke screen of COVID, without trying to be too controversial, but it all comes under commercial building radiation. Those who are doing things out there which I genuinely think is trying to help people, one minute they're doing help, the next minute their energy is being slammed by someone down the road who has a 16th century point of view on how healthcare should be, or where women should be in the workplace, rather than women going forward in their intuitive abilities and skills in their in what they do in alternate health. Just an example. Anyway, that got a little bit controversial. Doesn't matter. We're a little bit like that sometimes, and because we're observing things, we're seeing some of the atrocities that are going on out there, which energetically does manifest as commercial building radiation. Okay, that's enough for today. I hope we all had a great, exciting week. It'll be interesting to see what happens over the weekend. We're really glad to be able to go shopping this week, and hopefully I might get a meal at a restaurant out somewhere for the first time in 100 days. Not being facetious, but that's just the way it is here in Victoria. Thanks for watching. When you do get a chance to watch this, we will have another webinar in a couple of weeks' time, and we've got a couple of other really nice, interesting topics to talk about. May not be brand new and fresh, but we think it's nice to go back over some of the earlier topics and to reiterate some things, because people listen to things that sometimes it goes in one ear and out the other, because they get distracted and they just like to hear it again. And perspectives are always changing, and we don't ignore changing perspectives on things. And what we might say one day, 6 months later, we'll say the same thing, but we'll have a greater perspective. We'll have more things to say about it, because we don't lie down. We keep on working and looking under every rock and enjoying our research. So thanks for being part of today, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks' time.